You need to move along right now. This is your last warning.
The flashing blue and red lights reflected off the glass buildings of downtown Atlanta. Just as hundreds of commuters hurried toward the subway entrance, people stopped in confusion when they saw a police cruiser screech to the curb, its tires scraping against the pavement hard enough to turn dozens of heads. Before anyone understood what was happening, Officer Daniel Briggs stepped out with one hand already resting near his holster, his voice cutting through the busy morning like a siren. "Stand up right now." Every conversation nearby came to an abrupt stop. A black woman wearing a faded grey coat slowly looked up from the sidewalk where she had been sitting beside a weathered backpack. A small stray dog rested next to her feet, quietly eating the last few bites of a sandwich she had just shared with it. She didn't flinch, she didn't panic. She simply looked at the officer with calm, steady eyes that seemed strangely untouched by fear. Several pedestrians instinctively reached for their phones. Someone whispered, "What's going on?" Another replied, "I don't know, but she's not doing anything." Officer Briggs wasn't interested in explanations. "I said stand up." He barked louder, pointing toward the edge of the sidewalk, as if giving orders to a dangerous suspect instead of a homeless woman. The woman slowly rose to her feet, brushing the dust from her coat without saying a word. Her clothes were old and worn, and her shoes showed years of use. Yet, there was something unusual about the way she carried herself. Her shoulders remained straight, her expression stayed composed. Even in that tense moment, she projected quiet dignity that didn't match the image many people expected when they looked at someone living on the streets. Morning traffic continued flowing around them, but the confrontation quickly became the center of attention. Parents walking children to school stopped. Office workers paused with coffee cups in hand. Delivery drivers leaned out of their trucks. Within seconds, a growing circle of strangers watched in silence. Officer Briggs glanced around, clearly aware that people were recording. Yet instead of lowering the tension, his tone became even sharper.
"You've been sitting here long enough,"
he snapped. "People are complaining. You're making this entire block look bad." The woman looked around slowly before answering in a calm voice. "I've spoken to no one except this little dog." She gently reached down and stroked the frightened animal, which instinctively pressed closer to her leg, as if sensing the growing tension. "I've cleaned up around this sidewalk every morning this week," she continued quietly. "I haven't blocked anyone's path. I haven't asked anyone for money." Her words weren't defensive, they were simply factual. That seemed to irritate Officer Briggs even more. "You think you're smart?" he asked. "No, officer," she replied respectfully. "I believe respect goes both ways." A few people exchanged surprised glances. The officer took another step closer, until only a few feet separated them. "You're loitering," she answered calmly. "This is a public sidewalk. You refuse to leave. I haven't refused anything. You want to argue. I'm trying to understand why. You're treating me like I've committed a crime." The exchange grew quieter, but somehow even more intense. Nobody in the crowd spoke. The only sound was the rumble of a passing train beneath the street and the distant horns from morning traffic. An elderly man standing near a newspaper stand quietly shook his head. A young woman recording the scene whispered, "This doesn't feel right." Another person replied, "Just keep filming." The homeless woman never raised her voice. She never insulted the officer. She never stepped toward him. Instead, she stood with remarkable patience, looking directly at him with the kind of confidence that usually came from someone who understood, far more than they revealed. Officer Briggs studied her face for a long moment. Something about her composure irritated him. Most people became nervous when confronted by police. Most apologized, most hurried away. She did none of those things. She simply remained calm, almost as though she had expected this moment, long before his patrol car ever turned onto the street. The officer placed his hand on his handcuffs and leaned closer. "You have 10 seconds to disappear," he said coldly, "or I'll arrest you." The crowd fell completely silent. Even the dog stopped eating. For the first time, the woman lifted her eyes directly to his. There was no anger in her expression, no fear, no desperation, only an unexpected calm that made several people watching feel as though they were missing an important piece of the story. She took a slow breath before speaking in a steady, respectful voice. "Officer, are you absolutely certain that's the decision you want to make?" Officer Daniel Briggs held his gaze, clearly expecting the woman to back away the moment he mentioned arrest. Instead, she remained exactly where she was, her hands visible at her sides, her posture relaxed, and her expression calm enough to make the silence around them feel heavier than the morning traffic. For a brief second, even Briggs seemed uncertain. Most people reacted with fear when an officer threatened to take away their freedom. Some apologized, others argued. Many simply walked away to avoid trouble. She did none of those things. She wasn't challenging him. She wasn't provoking him. She simply stood there with quiet confidence, as though she believed the truth didn't need to be shouted. The officer's patience quickly disappeared. "You think this is a game?" he demanded. "No, officer," she answered respectfully. "I think every interaction between law enforcement and the public..." Several people exchanged surprised looks. That wasn't the answer anyone expected from someone who appeared to be homeless. A young college student lowered his phone for a moment and whispered to his friend, "She sounds educated." His friend nodded. Very educated, Briggs noticed the growing crowd instead of easing. The tension, he seemed increasingly frustrated that strangers were watching every move he made. "You've been asked to leave," he said louder, making sure everyone nearby could hear. "You're refusing a lawful order." The woman spoke in the same steady tone. "Officer, if I've violated a law, I'll cooperate with a lawful detention. If I haven't, I'd appreciate knowing what law I've broken." The question hung in the air. It wasn't disrespectful, it wasn't argumentative. It was reasonable for a split second. Briggs didn't answer instead. He stepped closer, trying to regain control of the conversation through intimidation rather than explanation. The stray dog quietly moved behind the woman's legs. Sensing the change in the officer's body language, a middle-aged businessman who had stopped to watch finally spoke. "Officer, she hasn't bothered anyone." Briggs immediately turned toward him. "Sir, unless you want to be part of this investigation." "Keep walking." The businessman raised both hands. "I'm just saying what everyone here can see." Another voice joined from the crowd. "I've passed this corner every morning this week," an elderly woman said. "She actually picks up trash before people get to work." More people began quietly agreeing. "She's always polite. She helped an elderly man cross the street yesterday. I've never seen her ask anyone for money." The comments spread through the crowd one after another. For the first time, Officer Briggs realized that the public perception of the woman was very different from his own. Rather than considering what he was hearing, he became even more determined to prove he was right. He folded his arms. "So now everyone's an expert on police work." No one answered. The crowd simply continued recording. Across the street, a local coffee shop owner stepped outside after hearing the commotion. He recognized the woman immediately. "Officer," he called calmly. "Every morning, she sweeps the sidewalk in front of my business before I open fee. I offer her breakfast because she's kind, not because she asks." Briggs barely looked at him. "Stay out of it." The owner frowned. "I am in it. This is my neighborhood." The woman turned slightly toward the coffee shop owner and smiled. "Thank you," she said softly. Then she looked back at Officer Briggs. "I don't want anyone arguing on my behalf." Her words surprised everyone. "I respect the difficult job police officers do every day," she continued. "Most officers serve with honor. That's why moments like this matter. Every decision an officer makes shapes how a community sees the badge." Several people lowered their phones for a moment. Listening carefully, even Briggs hesitated. It wasn't the speech of someone filled with resentment. It sounded like someone who genuinely believed that trust between police and communities could be protected or damaged, one interaction at a time. For an instant, there was an opportunity for the situation to calm down. Had Briggs simply asked another question, explained his concerns, or listened, the confrontation might have ended peacefully. Instead, his pride got in the way. "I've heard enough," he snapped. He reached for the radio clipped to his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I have an uncooperative subject refusing lawful commands, requesting backup." The dispatcher's voice crackled through the speaker. "Copy, Unit 12. Additional units are en route." The announcement immediately changed the atmosphere. People looked at each other with disbelief. One young mother quietly pulled her daughter a little farther back. A retired Army veteran standing near the bus stop folded his arms. "This is getting out of hand," he murmured. The woman remained perfectly still. She neither celebrated the support she was receiving nor reacted to the officer's decision. Instead, she gently bent down and refilled the stray dog's small water bowl from an old reusable bottle she carried in her backpack. The simple act caught everyone's attention. Even while facing the possibility of arrest, she was thinking about another living creature before herself. A teenage boy recording the encounter quietly said, "She's calmer than anyone else here." His father answered, without taking his eyes off the scene. Character shows under pressure. Within moments, another patrol car turned onto the street, followed by a second one, the flashing. Emergency lights reflected across nearby storefront windows, drawing even more pedestrians toward the scene. What had started as a routine encounter between one officer and a homeless woman was quickly becoming a public spectacle, and every new witness arrived with the same unanswered question. Why was a woman who appeared to have nothing still carrying herself like someone who had absolutely nothing to fear? The sound of approaching sirens echoed between the tall buildings as two additional patrol cars rolled to a stop beside Officer Daniel Briggs. Within moments, 3 more officers stepped out, carefully assessing the situation before saying a word. Their eyes moved from the growing crowd to the woman standing quietly beside the stray dog. Then back to Briggs. One of the officers spoke first. "What's going on?" Briggs answered confidently. "She's refusing to comply. I've given her multiple opportunities to leave." The woman didn't interrupt. She didn't try to defend herself. She simply stood with her hands visible, allowing the officers to make their own observations. One of the newer officers glanced around at the dozens of people holding up their phones. Were there any threats? No. Any assault? No. Any property damage? No. Briggs hesitated for a moment before adding, "She's creating a disturbance." A woman from the crowd couldn't stay silent any longer. "No, officer. The disturbance started when you arrived." Several people nodded in agreement. Another witness stepped forward. "I've been recording since the beginning. So have I, and I have the entire interaction." Within seconds, voices from every direction began sharing the same story. None of them described an aggressive homeless woman. Instead, they described someone who had remained respectful while an encounter continued to escalate around her. One officer quietly accepted that information without making assumptions. "Ma'am," he said politely to the woman, "would you mind telling me your name?" She smiled gently. "I'd prefer to wait until there's a lawful reason to identify myself." Her answer was calm and measured, not hostile, not sarcastic, simply calm. The officer gave a small nod. "I understand." Briggs immediately stepped forward. "See, she's refusing again." The older officer beside him looked thoughtful rather than convinced. Refusing to volunteer identification wasn't automatically a crime, and he knew that the crowd grew larger by the minute. Office workers who had originally planned to continue toward their jobs now stood shoulder to shoulder with students, delivery drivers, business owners, tourists and retired neighbors. Strangers who had never met one another found themselves united by a single question. Was this situation really being handled fairly? Just then an elderly, homeless veteran slowly approached from the opposite side of the sidewalk. His clothes were weathered, and he walked with the help of an old cane. He stopped a respectful distance from the woman. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you don't have to stay here. I've seen this officer lose his temper before." The woman turned toward him with genuine kindness. "Thank you for your concern." She paused before continuing. "But sometimes people don't realize the importance of their choices until those choices are seen by everyone." The veteran looked puzzled. "So you're staying?" She nodded softly. "If I leave now, nothing changes." Those words settled over the crowd like complete silence. People looked at one another. No shouting, no anger. Just quiet conviction. A local coffee shop owner lowered his phone and whispered, "She's trying to protect something bigger than herself." Across the street, an ordinary white maintenance van remained parked against the curb. It looked like every other city vehicle passing through downtown. No company logo, no attention. Just another van among hundreds. Inside, however, several people sat quietly behind tinted windows. One watched a live camera feed. Another carefully wrote notes onto a digital tablet. A third person occasionally checked the time before looking back toward the confrontation outside. No one inside the van spoke loudly. No one attempted to interfere. Every movement outside was simply being observed. Back on the sidewalk, Officer Briggs mistook the woman's calm confidence for stubbornness. "You've had enough chances," he declared. "You've ignored my instructions." The woman looked directly at him. "I've listened to every word you've said. You haven't obeyed. I've exercised my rights respectfully." Some members of the crowd quietly applauded her composure. Others remained completely silent, knowing the situation could still change in an instant. One little girl standing beside her mother tugged gently on her sleeve. "Mom," she whispered, "why is that lady being so nice when everyone's being mean to her?" Her mother looked down before answering. "Because real strength isn't always loud." The woman happened to hear those words. She smiled warmly at the child. "Always remember something," she said gently. "Never let someone else's anger decide who you become." The mother thanked her with tear-filled eyes. Even a few officers nearby appeared affected by the exchange. It reminded everyone watching that policing is one of the hardest responsibilities in public service. Every day, officers are asked to make difficult decisions under pressure, and the overwhelming majority strive to protect their communities with fairness and professionalism. Moments like this matter, because public trust is built not only through courage in dangerous situations, but also through patience, respect, and sound judgment in ordinary encounters. The woman understood that better than anyone. There seemed to realize she wasn't speaking against law enforcement. She was standing for the values that good officers work every day to uphold. Officer Briggs, however, remained focused on asserting authority rather than listening. He took one final step forward. His hand slowly moved toward the handcuffs attached to his duty belt. The crowd collectively held its breath. Phones rose higher into the air. The stray dog quietly moved closer to the woman. She neither stepped backward nor challenged him. She calmly folded her hands in front of her and met his eyes with unwavering confidence. Then, in a steady voice that carried across the silent street, she said, "Officer, every decision we make becomes part of the story people tell about justice. I hope this is the decision you truly want remembered." No one knew exactly what she meant. Not the officers, not the witnesses, not even the people watching through their phone screens, but somehow it felt as though an invisible clock had begun counting down towards something far bigger than a simple confrontation on a city sidewalk. And for the first time that morning, even Officer Briggs couldn't shake the feeling that he might not know the whole story. If this moment made you think about the importance of respect, accountability, and the relationship between law enforcement and the communities they serve, share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe Officer Briggs will realize his mistake before it's too late, or do you think the truth behind this remarkable woman will change everything? And what kind of justice do you hope to see unfold next? Your perspective could shape the discussion, and your ideas may even inspire the next story.